And welcome into the Georgia Vote extended streaming panel. Joining us, all veterans of the political roundtable, Republican strategist Mark Roundtree, Democratic strategist Fred Hicks, and in the middle, Shannon McCaffrey, AJC politics editor. If you were watching on the Georgia Vote earlier, you saw us talking about the Mike Thurmond dynamic in the Democratic primary in this governor's race. He's the former DeKalb County CEO. He recently announced he's jumping into the governor's race. And Shannon, you made this point. You said, it seems like most of the Democrats running are posturing as running in some ways against President Trump and against the Trump administration, save for Mike Thurmond. He used the word bridge builder a lot in his rollout. Fred, from a Democrat's perspective, is there room in a primary for somebody to carve out that more middle-of-the-road lane?
So in a crowded Democratic primary, I think there is. Now, if you see,
which we're seeing right
now,
right?
Currently, right. But now, once we get past qualifying next year, if the race narrows to 2 or 3 people, then there's not as much space for that. Now, what's interesting to me is that former Mayor Bottoms, as Shannon, you mentioned, is running her race against Donald Trump, which is what she did when she ran for mayor in 2017. I was on the opposite side representing a different candidate, and I watched her position herself as the Democrat in the race for mayor. Atlanta's a Democratic city, and she ran against Donald Trump. She didn't acknowledge her other candidates. So I've seen this playbook before from her, and it worked very successfully for her. And I think what's been interesting is that in this news cycle since the endorsement there, and since Michael Thurmond got into the race, we haven't heard from the person who was the top fundraiser on the Democratic side initially, and that's Jason Estevez. He's kind of fallen to the side there, and so his campaign, I think, is going to have to really figure out a way to get back into the news cycle, because Michael Thurmond is carving out a lane, and Mayor Bottoms is really dominant on the social media front. But for Democrats, it'll be interesting to see, how things go. But I do believe that the general feeling, the dominant feeling in the Democratic Party, is we want a fighter and someone who's going to fight against Donald Trump, particularly as we see efforts in Texas and Florida and other states to do things like redistricting that only calcifies the resistance to a Donald Trump amongst Democrats.
And you speak to the voters, you go to these town halls, and I think that is one of the biggest critiques that Democrats or their constituents have for their Democratic leaders, is that y'all aren't doing enough. We want to see more. Yeah, right. We want to see fighting. We want you to go toe to toe, head to head. But the Thurmond approach, I wonder, it is a different approach. Is that strong enough to work, or Mark, could he be seen as weak, not strong enough to beat Republican candidate for governor?
The thing about primaries of both political parties, the argument of electability sounds like it would be a strong one, and it usually doesn't work. I don't know that Michael Thurmond would go literally with that argument, and as the race goes on, he may kind of develop his own lane where he essentially is that person, electability, but not necessarily campaigning on that. And Lance Bottoms did represent a significant population of Democrats as well, but the city of Atlanta is half the size. It's 500,000 people versus DeKalb County's 1 million. So I think Thurmond has a little bit of an edge here if he can compete financially. And I think he'll be able to compete financially.
What Thurmond doesn't have that Keisha Lance Bottoms does have is the baggage and the reputation of her first term, that if you go out and ask some people from Atlanta, there's a mixed taste right now.
He chose to run for re-election and got elected overwhelmingly, and she chose not to run for re-election, and that probably says a lot. But I wouldn't count her out by any means. Please don't take it that way.
Well,
but I think he starts with an edge if he can.
She's very formidable, but she does have that baggage.
Well, again, this is a Democratic primary that's dominated by women. And so if we think that gender politics really kind of lead the way, at least in the Democratic primary, it tends to do that, I think that she has I would give her the slight edge right now. I do think that if, again, the field stays crowded, I think most people feel that it'll come down to those two. But let's be clear, you can't sleep on her. She's a heck of a campaigner. And DeKalb County has some issues, around the water billing and other things that the current CEO is having to deal with right now that are directly tied to his administration. So we might see Mayor Bottoms bring that up. So, let's be clear. He's not clear.
Shannon, let's bring you in.
I also wanted to mention there's another difference that we haven't alluded to, and that's a generational difference. Mike Thurmond is in his 70s. We've seen a Democratic Party that has been burned really badly by a candidate that was of age, of an advanced age.
Substantially older than Thurmond, just to be real clear here.
Yes, of course. And I'm not in any way, attacking Mike Thurmond's age, but there's a big difference between Keisha Lance Bottoms and Jason Estevez and Mike Thurmond. Mike Thurmond is kind of the old war horse, and they're much more young. You can even see the way they use social media differently. So I think that generational issue will be interesting to watch as well.
And tagging into what you did say about the fact that Mayor Lance Bottoms is obviously female, 2/3 of the voters in a Democratic primary are female. And a lot of Democratic primary voters vote on identification issues, whether it's race, whether it's age, whether it's whatever demographic. But that is going to be a very big help for her. It may be worth 10 extra points that she would otherwise get.
And let's be real, I mean, she, to my knowledge and to what I think, is that she has the most name recognition out of this field right now. Not only can she fundraise here in the state, but you're talking about national dollars, because she's been on the national stage for so much as well. So that's another thing that Estevez and Mr. Jackson and all of the others are going to have to really come after.
Let's talk about another primary that got a lot of attention this week. And Shannon, I think you put it pretty well before we started taping here. You said, it's been a week that just feels like there's been a lot that has happened and sort of a time compression happening here, because it was just this week, a few days ago, that President Trump endorsed Burt Jones in the gubernatorial contest on the Republican side. There is another prominent Republican in that race, still in that race. That's Chris Carr. He's the Attorney General. He didn't get this endorsement from President Trump. We've been talking about this Mike Thurmond sort of lane that he maybe is carving out on the Democratic side. In some ways, is Chris Carr doing something a little bit similar on the Republican side?
Yeah, possibly. I think he has done his best to kind of cozy up to Trump as much as he could, but it was no surprise to anyone that Trump endorsed Burt Jones. I mean, I think that was a given. One thing that would be interesting to see, I mean, there are still rumors that Brad Raffensperger is going to get into that race.
And he's been giving, some interviews around the state. There was a Wall Street Journal piece recently. I am no expert, but that seems like the kind of thing you do when you are floating the idea and softening the ground a little bit.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, if Brad Raffensperger gets into the race, he and Chris Carr sort of seem to occupy the same land, the same lane. We've been using that word a lot today, lanes. But he does seem to sort of occupy the same lane, and he's better known. So I don't know, we'll see. Chris Carr's campaign has not really caught fire in any way yet, but there's a lot of time left.
And the question I have too, obviously with the Carr campaign and anybody else who comes in, and then Burt Jones, you have the question of raising money, which is a big question from his campaign. But I want to ask about this Trump-Kemp dynamic, right? Trump has his guy. Will Governor Kemp back somebody before the primary, or could we see something where Trump's like, okay, you have your guy, now come back my guy on the Senate race, Derek Dooley? Mark, what do you think about that?
On the Senate side?
No, I'm saying, do you think that Kemp will back somebody in the Republican primary on the gubernatorial side?
I tend to doubt that, and I don't think it would all happen before a legislative session was over, because it would be destructive to a relationship with Burt Jones if it was not Burt Jones.
Who is still the leader of the Senate.
Yes, exactly, and a good point. As Lieutenant Governor, it would probably be destructive to the relationships, and if nothing, Kemp likes to get things done at the legislative level. He has been a quite accomplished governor. So I don't think it would happen before, and I don't think it'll happen at all. On top of that, no, I don't think he'll get involved in the governor's race.
Talking about Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his potential political future, we don't know what he may do. Shannon, you alluded there is speculation he's eyeballing a race, maybe for governor, maybe for Senate. If these fields continue to get more crowded, both in these Republican races, in the Democratic primaries as well, Fred, do they start to become races for runoffs, where the candidates are just trying to make it into the top two, as opposed to trying to win outright because it's such a divided field that voters are going to have to make a choice on?
Oh, absolutely, and that plays out in a lot of ways, including how you spend your money. Just remember back in 2018, the last time we had a crowded field for governor, Governor Kemp, then Secretary of State, decided to carve out the far right lane, and Mark knows this from, polling in Republican primaries, there's a good 25 or 28% or so Republicans who have since 2010 identified as far right, Tea Party, that kind. And so while the other candidates were fighting for other spaces, he owned that, and he slid into the runoff, where he then defeated then Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. And so when you're talking about 4 or 5 people running for the same position, you have to, and that's what we're talking about with the whole Michael Thurmond thing there, you have to find a lane that if you can get to 25 to 35% of the vote, then it locks you into the runoff, and it's a whole new day and a whole new game at that point. So you have to think about that. One thing I want to say.
Based on the history of campaigns, there will be about 1 million to 1.1 million Republicans voting in the Republican primary. So 350,000 voters voting for you guarantees you a lock into the runoff, essentially, unless there's some weird circumstance and someone goes over the top, but that's not likely. So I think the goal for most of these candidates is 350,000 votes, which is equivalent to about 200,000 households. When you really think about the fact that Georgia is 11 million people in its population, 200,000 households will win you the Republican primary, which is the lead party in the state. Probably the Democrats have a little bit less of a turnout, but they may be in the 900,000 range, something like that.
What about 800,000?
Would you say?
This one, yeah.
I mean, Faith, go ahead. Everyone's so polite here. We're all trying to find our manners. We've got, and then I got a producer saying, "Hey, wrap it up." So we got about 45 seconds here. And now he says 30 seconds. I do want to bring you in, Shannon. Maybe give you the last word here. We're talking about not a lot of voters, as Mark and Fred have pointed out, have a big impact on who the ultimate nominees of their party are that go on to the general election. You're an editor. You're a reporter. I bet sometimes you have voters come up to you around general election time and say, "Boy, how are these the two candidates we are choosing from?" And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but ideologically, are the most ideologically polarized voters often the ones who vote in a primary and then determine who the winner is, and then the more moderates just kind of pick up that baton once the general happens?
The most engaged, which often translates into more ideologically polarized. But it's definitely I mean, you in a primary like this where you're running for, you're trying to get into a runoff. You are not going out trying to woo voters who have never voted before. You are going to your base and you are trying to get them excited about you.
It's turnout, not persuasion.
That's right.
And Shannon, I just wanted to get one more question in for you, just from your reporting. Obviously, Democrats want this gubernatorial seat. They want to be the next leader of Georgia. We have not had very many Democratic governors. What is the likeliness that we could see Democrats take this win?
Oh
next year?
boy, I'd be really hesitant to put a guess on that. You know, I mean, it's an off year. Trump's popularity is a little bit iffy. I still think Republicans have a pretty strong advantage going into the election.
Yeah, and it's still very early right
Yeah.
now. Anything could change. Well, thank you so much for putting in your thoughts. We'll check back in with you in 6 months. And thank you so much to our panel. If you all are watching online, remember you can catch Zach and I and our panelists every Sunday morning at 11 on 11 Alive. We'll see you next Sunday.